Devlin work session here on Friday, March 1st. Work session on the DeArmond rezone, the AO number 2019-20 that we considered and held over. Yeah, Mr. Trainee.
Here.
Suzanne France.
Forrest Dunbar.
Christopher Constance.
Austin Quinn Davidson is coming. I'm Eric Croft.
Dice.
And
Peterson is here. He's just in the...
Pete Peterson and Mr. Rivera are here getting a sandwich. So how would the members like to approach this? It was a big contentious issue, still is. And this work session was requested because of it. Mr. Weddleton or Ms. LaFran?
I do have some thoughts.
Okay.
I would like to have staff teach us what the rezone is. And then we can ask questions. And then also give some time for the developers to present. And if we have something, I would like to make sure there's some capture or something. Will that work?
Yeah, and I mean, that'd be great. So we'll go planning department, we'll hear from the developer, and then we'll hear from some of the public. Public testimony, as Mr. Haberman and I go round and round on, is not required at work sessions, but it can be a part of them. And so we'll make it a part of this one. So who's here? Yeah, Madam Clerk.
Through the chair, I'd like to address Mr. Weddleton's comment about what having, staff, the planning staff, and obviously I think that's very helpful. Mr. Gates wrote you a memo that was passed out at the last meeting, and so I would like to make copies of that for you as well for this meeting. I think that would be helpful. Is that all right, Mr. Chair?
That'd be great.
Thanks.
All right, Mr. Weldon, so what is a rezone? Well, so all the city is divided up or has zoning districts. And they're described, the rules in each zoning district in our land use planning code, Title 21. And there's all sorts of different districts: industrial, commercial, park districts, residential districts. Zoning ensures, protects people's investment in their properties and the values of, the value of their property by giving some assurances about what you're allowed to do on your property.
What your neighbors can do.
Yeah, thank you. Our rezoning process, that's when you want to change your zoning. We have regulations that address that in Title 21. You're required to put together the applicant, so the owner of property, someone that's got site control, they would develop a mailer that they send out to all the people that live within a 500-foot radius of the property that they want to change the zoning for. And they would mail that first-class mail to all the property owners within a 500-foot radius of the petition site. And they'd have to postmark that at least 21 days prior to having a community meeting, the meeting that they invite people to. The preference in code is that you have a community meeting at the regular community council meeting, but you can have your own meeting if it doesn't work for timeline or something like that. And in that case, you have to describe why it is you're not having it at the community council meeting. So you have the developer, the applicant would reach out to the community council and say, hey, can I have some time on your agenda to be able to speak to this, and can I send out this mailer and be on the agenda for your meeting? So they go to that meeting and they have to answer questions. They have to say, where is the property that they're going to be rezoning, and they have to talk about, what their application will be. They want to change from, this zoning district to a different zoning district. This is the purpose of that community meeting, is to have an early dialogue with the affected community council or the neighbors prior to even making application for a rezone. So the next step is to make an application, submit it to the planning department and to the rezone. That's noticed. There's a public hearing in front of the Planning and Zoning Commission. The commission makes a recommendation, and then if they recommend approval or approval with special limitations, then that recommendation is forwarded to you. That's what you saw at your last meeting on Tuesday night. If the commission recommends denial, then the only way for it to make it to the next stage is for it's sort of a separate process. It doesn't automatically go to the assembly. It will end there unless the applicant asks an assembly person to introduce the ordinance, and that's the only way it makes it onto the assembly. Does that answer your question, Ms. Welton?
Well, there are somewhat. There are 9 conditions for a rezone.
Oh, yeah, approval
I'd like to
criteria.
hear what those are, because I think there's a lot of extraneous information that gets public in the past, but it's not really relevant to rezone. And I think we should all know when we consider a rezone, what is relevant.
Sure. I'll just flip to our code and read those standards of approval or approval criteria. Yeah, so it's not a popularity contest. It's although it's important to try and seek consent and support from neighborhoods. I don't mean to diminish that. Thanks. All right. Looking in the wrong chapter. All right, so the approval criteria for rezonings. The first one is the rezoning shall be in the best interest of the citizens of Anchorage and shall promote the public health, safety, and general welfare. So that's sort of a global thing. It's not just the affected neighbor or community council. This is looking at community-wide public benefit. The rezoning complies with and conforms to the comprehensive plan. We have at least 2 that are specific to this the petition site that's before you. So there's the Hillside District Plan and Anchorage 2040 Land Use Planning document. The third approval criteria is rezoning is generally consistent with the zoning district purpose in the requested zone and the purpose of this title. The fourth one is the rezoning is compatible with surrounding zoning and development and protects areas designated for specific uses on the zoning map for incompatible land uses or development intensities. Fifth one is facilities and services, including roads, transportation, water, gas, electric, police, fire, and sewage, and waste disposal, as applicable, are capable of supporting the uses allowed by the zone or will be compatible by the time the development is complete while maintaining adequate levels of service to existing development. The sixth one is the rezoning is not likely to result in significant adverse impacts upon natural environment, including air, water, noise, stormwater management, wildlife, and vegetation, or impacts shall be substantially mitigated. The seventh approval criteria is that the proposed rezoning is not likely to result in significant adverse impacts upon adjacent land uses or such an impact shall be mitigated through stipulations. Those are special limitations. The rezone does not extend or exacerbate a land use pattern that is inconsistent with the comprehensive plan. The rezoning shall not result in split zone lots. That's the approved criteria for which planning department evaluates applications to change the zoning.
Okay, so if I can.
Yeah. Well, no, it's kind of appropriate that you do. I guess I wanted to ask, and it took me a long time to understand this. I had assumed that as we made different comprehensive plans, different planning documents that had different recommendations for density and the allocation of these of housing and the uses across the town, that we would update our zoning to fit that we would rezone, if you will, to fit the new plan when you say, hey, this was an area that was this, and now it's going to be more of this. But it really doesn't happen that way, right? These rezones are the way we very slowly bring individual zoning into conformity with new plans.
That's exactly right. I mean, there are exceptions to that. There were the original area-wide rezonings that took place to bring zoning to parts of, or to town in the 60s and 70s. And then you know, the municipality can bring forward rezone of private property as well. But what you said is true.
So, but we haven't used that power, and I would imagine it'd be pretty controversial to say, guess what? You thought you were R4, you're R6, or you're industrial, or you're whatever in one big sweep. We've never exercised that.
Municipality would probably want to consult with the owners before changing their zoning.
You'd think, yeah. Okay, let's go for a couple, and then we'll come back to you, Mr.
Training's
Dyson.
on there too.
Oh, were you? Oh, Mr. Training, then. Fine.
Mr. President, sometimes we have people that ignore the zoning. They put something in a law. They need to go through the process of trying to stop that from happening. I mean, having that happen all over town, isn't that correct?
Yeah, and we have the zoning police for that. That's our land use enforcement group. And that's not under the planning department, but you're right, yeah.
So I'll get to other questions, just finishing mine. So then, really what we have is a lot of different old zonings left over that either don't fit our current plans, and Mr. Schutte was explaining to me, we have things that aren't even zonings that we do anymore left over, right? There are people who have zones that we're not issuing anew anymore.
Yeah, there's all kinds of permutations. It's wide open. It's just as you say. It's quite complicated. Yeah.
Things that we don't zone, people have a legal grandfathered
Yes.
old zone. Okay.
Yeah.
I lost track of it. That was Ms. Dyson, you're done? Yeah, or did you want, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. This is really informative. Reflects a predisposition of mine, but it seems to me the country's founding documents really put a premium on private property rights. And I didn't hear in your list of criteria anything that said that there's a predisposition or a responsibility to protect the rights of property owners to develop as they want through the process, as long as it doesn't have an demonstrably adverse effect. Anyways, does the process consciously try to protect the rights of property owners?
Yeah, I think that's built into it, sure.
Is it explicit? I'm sure it's implied.
Well, so I think the approval criteria that I read from puts a premium on compliance with our adopted community plans, and which the assembly passes, and that's sort of we view it as it's the community's will for the land uses, what's allowed, what zoning districts are appropriate for certain areas. But there is the non-conforming rights section that if you comply with those regulations, then you have the right to keep what you have or what existed prior to new zoning laws being adopted.
Okay, keep it moving. Mr. Constant and then Mr. Trainer.
Yeah, you know, the kind
Back
of
to
point
you.
you raised, Mr. Chair, about the idea of kind of globally making changes to zoning on global properties. There is an impulse in the community now, at least in the downtown areas, that I've heard people discussing overlays, zoning overlays, which would be that kind of global changes to broader areas. And it is a conversation fraught with peril, and everyone who is strong advocacy positions for one use or another wants to leapfrog straight to the overlay, because then they can exert their will on their neighbors through the municipal process. And so my experience with it is we must be very careful in contemplating the use of that power.
Oh yeah, it just, both ends of it are crazy, right? If you say, I'm just going to tell everybody you thought you had this property, now suddenly tomorrow you have this property, I could see why that would piss me off and be controversial. But the other is crazy too, right? We have this weird patchwork of old stuff where people haven't gotten around to getting it in conformity with anything. So we think we have a plan, but it's really individual rezones that bring you forward towards it. Mr. Tranian and Mr. Whitaker.
Mr. Fred was talking about the rights of property. Keep in mind, it was originally done to limit suffrage in this country. You had to do a white male, you had to own property to vote. Over the 200 years, we've expanded that coverage to everybody, but first, let's show the property to the voters. And there's a mechanism to stop people from voting. Francis, is having community neighborhood meeting just as valid as going to community council for the purpose of this rezone?
Yeah, I mean, so the code requires that you have a community meeting, and it is permitted to be your own private meeting, or your own, the meeting that the owner sets up separate from the community council, but there's the preference that it be at the community council.
Yeah.
Just as valid, and we extended that, didn't we, to marijuana licenses? Because a marijuana license can go to community council or have their own neighborhood meeting.
Yeah.
So it's something we've done for years, 2 vehicles to make this happen.
Yeah, and it's useful to point out that the old zoning code didn't require a community meeting or a community council presentation for any land use entitlement. The new, our current zoning code does for many land use entitlements.
Okay, Mr. Weddleton, let me get you on the list, yeah.
Okay, just a couple points. One is we've been talking about this for about 12 minutes. And at that time, we heard a rundown of what a rezone is, the criteria of the rezone. We've had a little piece of discussion even to the philosophy of our country here. So we learned a lot in 12 minutes. It's very beneficial. Okay, just make a note of that because we've had complaints on this that the process, the community meeting on this was not sufficient. But the community meeting requirements in Title 21 for many things, like plans, replats, and things like that. You're required to have a community meeting. Those are very complicated. Those are lines on a map, great detail, where the roads are, traffic impact analysis, and so on. There's a lot to it, but a rezone, just a rezone. We heard lots from the neighbors about lines drawn on the maps, about the conditions of the soils, and so on. Problems that they have, the way they wish their lots are bigger, and so on. And that this is just a reason. Is R10 appropriate for this piece of property? And we go through these 9 criteria and look at it. And all this, a lot of other fluff out there, and we really need to narrow down and say these 9 criteria. And there are a couple criteria. One is there's required for a community meeting. And I'd like to hear, did they meet the requirements for a community meeting?
Yeah, the planning department judged that the community meeting requirement was met. They sent, I reviewed the mailer, it's included in your packet on page 69 of your packet. Page 68 is the summary of that community meeting. They sent a mailer out, and the mailer had all the minimum requirements, showed the location, and told people, to come to the community council meeting on this date and time and place, and that what they were going to be asking for was a change in zoning from a current R8 to an R10, and then they said if you have any other questions, you may follow up by calling this number or emailing this address for people who can't attend the community council meeting. So that mailer was mailed out more than 21 days prior to the community council meeting. There was a community council meeting. They spoke at that meeting. They wrote a summary of that meeting. That's included in your packet. And then it goes on to the public hearing and all that. And so the notification gets sent out for 2 public hearings, one for planning and zoning commission, one for the assembly. And our application's posted, or the application's posted online. There's all these sort of, it's publicly noticed. Yeah.
Okay, but what we heard from the public, the neighbors who've been very involved with it was a 12-minute meeting, and they just thought it was ridiculous. How could you possibly cover the important information in 12 minutes? And my question is, can you cover the important information for R10?
Well, I don't think that, so they haven't even applied yet. I think it's, with the purpose statement of the community meeting is that it's an early opportunity to begin the dialogue with, the most affected neighbors about, a type of land use entitlement you'll be applying for. So they're going to apply for rezone. And so this process ensures that they tell, the community council and the neighbors who are interested that they're going to be applying for something. Yeah, so I don't know if I answered your question.
12 minutes,
Yeah, so the planning department and the zoning code does not dictate how long the meeting would be, what, how the community council should run their meeting, whether or not they should comply with their own bylaws, or, all the internal dynamics and politics of the community council is outside of anything that's in the land use code.
I have almost everyone on the list, I think, but I have a list, and so we'll get to all of you in order. I put myself on the list. we're 22 minutes into the meeting and I haven't got to my one question yet. So I would just fundamentally disagree. A 12-minute, because I put myself in order and didn't just jump in, the one question I wanted would have been totally, and it is about the meeting, because I think it's a farce. I think to have one of the applicants chair a meeting, put it at the end, and have it for 12 minutes when they're just starting. It's it's four people testifying before us. If we meant a actual discussion, this is inadequate. And so we should either take it out of the code or recognize that they didn't do it here. I represented downtown when the Downtown Community Council was essentially taken over by Bill Weimer and the halfway house interest down there. And so for a while they were sham meetings. They could meet on various things, but if it was anything about a halfway house, you know it was going to come because all his employees came there. And it was frustrating to see that kind of sham process and trying to represent people that are doing that. This smells like that. And so my question was sort of the flip side of that. How can you guys in your documents certify this as complying with the community meeting?
So, Mr. Croft, I think you're missing the point. That,
I am. Help me.
Yeah. So, a rezoning does not tie the property to a particular development, particular subdivision. A rezoning is that zoning district that's proposed appropriate for that location, based on the merits of the rezoning and of the 9 approval criteria. So, this is about a rezoning, and the planning department looks at it in terms of, what could be the most offensive, most intense development that could occur under the proposed zoning. Because once the zoning is changed, there could be redevelopment of the property, any plans that the current owner has could go away. None of this is binding.
But that's the merits.
Mr. Croft, what we look at is whether or not that zoning is appropriate in that location if it was developed to the maximum extent that zoning district would allow.
I didn't ask about the merits of zoning. I asked how could you, in your findings, say they had a community meeting on this record? How could you make that determination in your findings when this is the record of the meeting?
So they're required to describe the zoning, and they did that as far as I can see from the community meeting summary.
You made findings in your document, a community meeting was held, and summary of the meeting. If they'd had it for 1 minute, if they gavelled in and said, they're here, but we don't have any time, would you have certified that meeting in your findings?
So the planning department looks to see that community meeting summary and the mailer comply with code. That's what our code says. Now,
okay, so the answer is yes. If they gavelled in and gavelled out, you would have said you sent letters, you had a meeting, that's good enough.
Well, it's not just me. The Planning and Zoning Commission's findings say that all the requirements of Title 21
Okay.
comply with.
So that's a yes. You would certify it, and P&Z might have, but they're not before me. You are. You'd certify it if they gavelled in and gavelled out.
Well,
because they had a meeting.
The planning department, our municipal attorneys, yeah, that's
There's no standard of adequacy. There's just they had a meeting.
I think that this is a bit of a loaded question.
Mr. Chair.
Okay, so that was my time as just askers, but I have Ms. Quinn Davidson, Mr. Dyson, Mr. Dunbar, Mr. Constant, Trainee, and Gretchen all in the line. So Ms. Quinn Davidson.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. So I guess it'd be nice to hear the code language. What does the code actually require? Because that will give us some guidance into whether that was met. I think in general, it's nice for staff to lay out these 9 criteria and then speak to whether they were met. And I felt that the memo we got was really light. I mean, it was 1 page and it didn't speak to all of this. So I think I'd just like to suggest in the future that I think that could head off some of, you're clearly informed on this and could answer all these questions. So if we could have a memo that goes through those criteria and then answers that in advance, I think that would be helpful. But if you could, I don't know if everyone's interested or if we have time to speak to each of these criteria, but certainly the meeting one is a big topic and something we've heard a lot about, and I'm sure you have too. So could we hear either from you or Dean, what's the code language, and for the requirement for the Title 21 rezone meeting?
It says, the applicant shall use as its first choice for a community meeting, community council meetings of the project area as a community meeting when the community council meeting is available. If an applicant chooses not to use community council for the community meeting, the applicant shall provide a written explanation to the director outlining the reasons for the decision. The explanation shall be available. If the community meeting is in the project area, schedule in a timely manner. The applicant shall organize a community meeting. If the project area spans more than one community council, the applicant chooses to attend community council meetings. This is about the timing, the 21 days.
So
talks
it
about the
doesn't
notice.
define what the community meeting is. Because I think that's what Eric's getting to, like what constitutes a meeting. 12 minutes, 1 minute, but it doesn't ever define what the community meeting needs to be.
Right, and it shouldn't, because micromanaging how the community council runs their own meeting is not the business of the land use code.
Yeah, and we've all been at community councils where chairs don't run it well and you have 5 minutes left and you've got to get through something. So I think we're all sympathetic to that, but it's just, we're balancing that with the applicants. They follow the rules, so it's not really their fault, but the community feels unheard. Anyway, we have a lot of questions. So
Ms. Quinn Davison, the big picture is that the community meeting was held more than a year ago. And so there has been time between then and now for people to ask questions about this project. And they have.
that's
Mr.
fine.
Dyson.
I'm sympathetic to what you raised, Mr. Chair. And also are not wanting to tell the community councils how they do their business. And I too have seen community councils very much manipulated. And I've seen people come in, pay their dollar, join right there, take over the meeting and railroad something through or kill something. And, or you could see, in this case, the chair of that community council just not having meetings, and get canceled and so on, and setting this whole process back. So that's a tough one. And community councils are a delightful part of our municipal code and give a chance for it. Most people in the community don't even know it exists, and it's easily manipulated. But the gentleman said at the start of his thing here that we don't tell the community council how they've got to do it. And I'm sorry, that's a tough one.
I put myself back on the list, but I'll go in order. Mr. Dunbar.
Yeah, I think much of what I was going to ask about has already been asked, so I'll try to ask something else. The way I'm understanding and describing the community council, or the community meeting process, doesn't have to be a community council, but it's mostly an initial notice. Is that right? I mean, it's mostly a notice process. It's not supposed to be an in-depth discussion of here is the logistics of what we're going to do, here are all our plans, but rather telling people in the area, we are planning to go from this rezone process to this rezone process. Is that accurate?
If I could just respond really quickly, and then I think Dean wants to speak up. They're supposed to describe the land use entitlement that they'll be requesting.
Right.
Which is, we talked about, zoning is pretty general.
And I mean, there are a variety of timing requirements. So in part, it's sort of a handbrake, right? So you couldn't go through rezone really quickly. You have to send out the notices. You have to have the meeting, regardless of how long the meeting is. And you probably have to wait a certain number of days after that as well. Is that correct?
Yeah, under the best case scenario, rezoning takes almost a year. This is now past that.
So, and I think this is kind of what John was getting at the beginning. We're talking about a rezone, because one of the common things I've heard is, why did they show us the plat, right? But my understanding is that the plat really is sort of
Non-binding.
orthogonal, right? The issue is sort of not related to what we're talking about. Is that correct?
That's correct. There'll be a separate community meeting that has to be noticed, a separate public hearing with another body, the planning board, that deals with the preliminary plat. That'll come later should the rezoning be adopted.
So can I hear what you wanted to say and then ask a follow-up, Mr. Chair?
Yeah, sure. Mr. Gates can interrupt. No one else can, but Mr. Gates can.
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, I just wanted my perspective of what the code requires. This issue has come up, so I did wanted to go. So first, I think the code requirements are sort of a subjective and objective aspects. Community there's some objective things you can look at, which is, the notice was 21 days before it was held, so forth. That's kind of outlining how the timing is 210320C. There's the purpose, which is rather subjective and not setting what the issue is all about. But
What's it say about the purpose?
The purpose of the community meeting is an informal opportunity for the developer to inform the surrounding area residents and and property owners of the details of the proposed development and application, how the developer intends to meet the standards given in this title, and to receive public comments and encourage dialogue at an early time of the review process. So how do you measure that?
Will you send that to everybody, Mr. Gates?
See, I think, sorry, as a follow-up on that,
Sure.
doesn't that language seem a little problematic because it has the word details right in there? And certainly you can't go into details in a 1-minute meeting. And I think also, regardless of how this turns out here, I know that Mr. Dyson and others have expressed we don't want to micromanage community councils. The community councils are only one potential venue for this meeting. It happens to be the preferred one. It happens to be where this will go. But I would be comfortable changing the law to say it must be at a minimum half an hour or something like that. And if the community council can't accommodate you, then you have to go somewhere else.
If I really want to step in, Mr. Dunbar. So the purpose statement is aspirational. So it's trying to encourage the developer to share as much information about that land use entitlement that they're seeking as possible. Okay, so that's
Where is the purpose statement? Is it in like a whereas, or is it actually in the code?
It's in the
It's
code.
in the code, but it's a purpose statement. It's supposed to tell you what the intent of this is. It's sort of like big picture, right? The subjective thing. The other thing is that what's missing from this discussion is that the community meeting, this requirement, because there's all these references, there's not a community meeting requirement under rezoning that's different from subdivisions, which is different for like building permit. This is the sort of the section on community meetings that's supposed to apply to all of those: rezoning, subdivisions, conditional uses, marijuana, institutional master plans, major site plan reviews. So you would hope, public facility site selection. So you would hope that with a major site plan review that they would have a drawing there to show, what they're seeking to apply for, but with a rezone, that's not the case. So I'm just trying to say that this section is meant to apply to nearly all land use entitlements we have.
Thank you. That's
It's
a
a general
really good point.
statement.
I think that's a really good point because, you need to have a lot of details when you're doing a marijuana application or maybe a site plan review, but I'm persuaded by the notion that the rezones are maybe a different standard. Thank you.
I have Constant Trainee, Wimhoff, Croft, and Weddleton. Anyone else want in? Mr. Constant.
Thank you. So I looked through the records and did not find a copy of the minutes from the meeting that we're discussing, so I asked for them to be found, and they were found and put on the table in front of you. And the reason I do that is because we can talk about every case under the sun, but the case before us is the one we need to get to the heart of. And what I found interesting about these minutes were a few things. If you turn to the last 2 pages, it's basically item 8 down in the minutes. And the minutes are really quite thorough, talking about who said what, why, where, when, and how. And these minutes are marked as approved if you turn back to the front page. So why I find that to be important is that at the time, a year ago, February 28, 2018, the community council met. The notice was sent out to them as proper. We've already heard from the planning department. The meeting was held, and nobody objected at the time that this meeting is too short. That wasn't recorded, and these records are very clear who said what. And in fact, at the next meeting, the minutes were approved, and no one raised the objections at that time. And so all of these objections that I'm starting to hear now about how improper this meeting was appear to me to be a means of looking backwards at the process and saying what the flaws are, instead of looking at the germane body under their germane process, under their bylaws, when you had an opportunity to make an argument that it wasn't right. And so what I'm hoping people will do is read really carefully through these minutes, because there's nowhere in there that somebody raises the objections that we have now heard over and over again after 7 more meetings have occurred. And so the question of whether or not the standard was met, if you take it upon the records of the meeting that happened by the people who were there, to me appear to be met. And I think there's some weight that should be granted to the records as they stand instead of the opinions of people who are coming before us now, whose names are on this list, right? They're actually named on this list right here as having had testified at that time, and at a meeting in May, and through all these other meetings. And so I just think that we would be wise to really contemplate. We said to the applicant to go to the council. The council's records show that it happened in the way that it happened, and we would be unwise to second guess that.
Okay, Mr. Trainee.
Francis, how many notices were mailed out, do you know?
Yes.
Yep. You sure, Mr. Rivera? You're the only one not on the list.
Not this amazing.
251.
How many attended the meeting, do we know?
Yours says 144 public hearing notices were
There
mailed
were-
on May 8th.
You said 251.
I know, that's why I'm asking him, Mr.
They're
Trainee.
different. The notices that the planning department sends out is a second set.
Okay.
There were approximately 30 attendees according to minutes. I just wanted to say too that the planning department doesn't attend these meetings. We don't, so that's why they're required, the applicants are required to write up the community meeting summary that is available for the community council to review and object to if they think that it's inaccurate.
That was my other
That's
question.
the chat.
One more for Dean. Dean, by our code, by bylaws, how many votes do we need to approve this rezone? It said it's coming just from P and Z. They approved it 7-0. How many votes? 6 or 8?
8.
I want
Because there's,
Dean to tell me.
yeah,
How
the
many?
code section says if there's valid protest by the supermajority, 8 votes. If there's no protest, you just have a majority, you have valid protest by.
Okay, did the community council protest it, or did the individuals protest this rezone?
Oh, so it's not the community council, the people who protest are those who, I think,
Make up,
100 feet of the outer belt.
20% of the acreage within 300 feet of the petition site.
Yeah, we asked Mr. McLaughlin.
Anthony gets to jump
They
in.
made that requirement.
Yes, we have an AIM that says requirements to have that.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Yeah, we asked him at the meeting if that threshold had been met, and he told us it had. So it triggered the 8-vote requirement. Ms. Wimhoff.
Yes, I asked several questions. I sent a question out to our legal folks, and it got passed to the next legal person, to the next person. I'm passing this on to the next person, and finally Mr. Schutte answered it. And basically what I did is I sent them, Mr. Doherty had sent an email. Gosh, it went through at least 3 attorneys here, and none of them answered, but Mr. Schutte did answer, and his words were that that Mr. Doherty brought the same concern in the municipal legal department and the Office of Economics. However, what I think is really interesting is we're talking about whether things were challenged or questioned. The issue was raised at the Planning and Zoning Commission hearing, but the commissioners did not agree. The commission recommended approval of the rezoning, etc. And then his last paragraph was, there are no code provisions about the length of the community meeting, whether it's 12 minutes or 12 hours. And then later on, I asked questions that of Ms. McNulty, who did a pretty good job answering them too, and they just accidentally didn't get forwarded until during our meeting. But I'm just trying to find them because I wanted to show that happened on Tuesday. Here we so sorry. Here they go. So she answered the questions pretty clearly, and it says that the summary should include the number of people that participated in the meetings, a summary of concerns, issues, and problems expressed during the meeting. And so I'm looking for those problems and concerns. And here's my take on this. You know, I'm a teacher. I've been a teacher a long time. And when I go down A, B, C, D, during the quarter, I make the D 58 and 59%. I don't give them the whole all the way down to 60 because I think a D is, well, the kids call it D for diploma. You know, work a little harder and get a C, or work a little harder and fail, but don't just wander in there. And I just think that in the sake of, if you really want something to pass, if you really want something to go by and get approved, that there's a point that you should probably try to go above and beyond. Maybe the minimum says we do this, but if you want good relations with your neighbors, if you want to make sure it happens, then the smart thing to do is get those neighbors on your side before it goes too far. And I just don't think that in these answers and in this situation, even looking at these minutes, there is no summary. In fact, several of the questions are, here's one, how many lots are you contemplating? Between 5 and 45, depending on several factors. Can you change the grade with a bulldozer to make it flatter? No, there's several requirements for slope bases. And then the next thing is, oh, we got to close the meeting because we're running out. And so I agree, I understand that it doesn't have to be a community council meeting, and I really appreciated the meeting that happened the night before the assembly, but I think that kind of meeting needs to happen sooner. And although it may be code and it may be listed, boom, 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 this is what you do, I still think that we need to make sure that people feel like they have been heard. And so if I were to ask to do something here, I would like the developers and some representatives of the neighbors to actually get in a meeting with a mediator or with someone and work this out so that everyone can feel like they've been communicated with and then bring it back. I don't think it's ready to vote on and be approved, but I think it needs more work and I think it needs more communication. And if this is approved without more communication, we will have a never-ending resentment in that part of town. And I just don't think that that's something we should encourage. Thank you for letting me be
Move
here.
myself off the list or down on it, really. Mr. Weddleton.
Actually, great to follow that because I really appreciate that. And I have been to many, many rezone meetings, probably you have, on both sides of them. And you have someone says, we're going to rezone from X zone to Y zone, and it's going to be this area, and here's what we're going to do. You know, we're going to plat it like this, we're going to do this with these buildings here, parking here, and this is, and you have drawings of the buildings and stuff, and it's awesome. And the neighbors will say, well, what about this? We'll put that fence in. What about, how are you going to deal with this? Well, we're going to deal with this, and we'll do a traffic impact analysis. We'll make sure that's met. And it's a good meeting, and the neighbors feel wonderful. And it's absolute BS. It's only a rezone. And you can cover the rezone, and 12 is a lot. It's just a rezone. What neighbors want, though, is how many lots? We don't know yet. You simply can't know. Well, where are you going to put them? How close are we can't know. It's just a rezone. That's the plan. So people want that, but you're lying to tell them that.
Could I
And then
respond
you do
to
those
him?
rezones.
Well,
And
we're
let me
45 minutes in. We've not heard yet from the developer, and so I do think
But
we
I'm
need
just
to move
finished.
on.
People want that, and they feel better about it. But then they get the rezone, they sell it. None of that matters. It's irrelevant. To really be honest, we just talked about the rezone and
Ms. Quinn Davidson.
what we're dealing with.
Yeah, perfect. Mr. Weddleton's totally right on. You might want something, those are not the requirements. And our job is to interpret the law. It's not to say what we think is a good idea, and that's unfair to developers. It's unfair. They need to have consistency and they need to know what's expected, and I think they followed it. But I also want to point out, I really appreciate Mr. Constant getting these minutes. The meeting was adjourned at 8:55. Our community councils are frequently extended either to 9 or to 9:15, depending on whether the building allows for it. And I would just note that it wasn't even up to the 9 time. So I want to know if anyone who's here today was at that meeting and can speak to whether someone said, I want to talk more, no, we don't have time, or we do. I don't think it's actually relevant in a way because the meeting standard was met, but I don't even know if that was a problem.
Who was at that meeting that's here? Developer and two. Okay. We said that we would hear from the developer and hear from the public some. We're quickly running out of time. I have Mr. Peterson, me, we'll all cross off, and Mr. Constant. Mr. Peterson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And, we're contemplating maybe changing the code to require a longer meeting, 20 minutes, 30 minutes, whatever. But we can't change it retroactively. The meeting happened. It is what it is. 12 minutes is what we got. And we can't come back and say, oh, no, but that wasn't long enough. I think a meeting was a meeting. Whether everyone was totally satisfied that they got all the information they wanted or not, it wasn't a meeting.
Mr. Constant.
So, following that line, and to kind of pay credence to the work of the folks who have made this petition, at the May 23rd meeting of 2018 of the same community council, the petitioner did go back. As an unnecessary meeting, they met their requirement as far as the planning department was told. And they had a meeting for 45 minutes, at which the public was also welcome to communicate. It wasn't the meeting of the standard, but I do have those minutes in my hands as well. And so they did, in fact, do what you're suggesting, which is go back, because if there were concerns, they wanted to be there. And so those minutes are available.
Were they listed on the summary, those
No.
meetings?
No, but I did ask the petitioner if they could make a list of all of the various entities that they reached out to in meetings, so they can present that to you when they get there.
Shouldn't they have been, well, that's my question, is in the original packet, was that listed
So
that came
I
to them?
asked our department, our planning, hey, do you have this? They didn't require it. It wasn't organized.
It was in the packet.
It was-
Ms. LaFrance.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Most of my-
I
What?
think this is important. Is anything in the record about the second meeting? In the record, I mean, of the documentation.
It didn't meet the criteria, and so it wasn't put in their summary. I thought it was in our packet, though, reference to that meeting.
Was it? Okay.
Well-
Well, on record, just like
In our packet was a letter from Mr. Doherty that listed that, and there was also testimony about it, and that no questions were answered on it. Ms. Priestley's letter mentions that meeting. So it was mentioned at least 3 times in our packet.
We have that list of meetings that includes the Halo meeting in the packet. I'm not sure, I don't remember if that one.
Okay. So just, now we've got 10 minutes, but it was both referenced and listed in at least 3 places in the packet that I saw. Ms. LaFrance.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just real quick to respond to Ms. Quinn-Davis's question about those special meeting on the February meeting. And yes, those Hillside Community Council meetings need to end, I think, 10 to 15 minutes before 9, because the janitor needs to button things up. The meeting, so it can't go any later than that. And yes, there was frustration from the community who wanted more detail, which may or may not have been appropriate, as Mr. Whittleton, probably not, for a rezoning question. And I don't know who approved the minutes or what kind of discussion there was surrounding that, or how the minutes of the 5/20 meetings running. But there was some frustration from folks to want more discussion.
Does approving the minutes mean
Ms.
that they
Wimhoff.
agree with it? Thank you. Does approving the minutes, you approve minutes because you say, yes, that's what happened. Approving the minutes does not say you agree. It just simply, this is what happened.
Did you want to hear from the developer and the public?
I think a few minutes from each would be appropriate.
Okay, we only have a few minutes left, so anything the developer wants to say in about 3 or 4?
Thank you everyone today for being here for a work session. I realize everyone's busy. Rezoning involving, that's very important to both the neighbors and developers who will be the neighbors as well. And I appreciate especially my name is Becky and last name is Wilson, and I'm here on behalf of the petitioners. So we've heard almost all of the dialogue today has been on the sufficiency of the community council meeting, and I appreciate Mr. Gates's comments as to there are subjective and objective elements in code. And the objective elements are what the developer is able to base their requirements off of. Subjective elements include, was this a good meeting? I'm not sure in this particular rezone, having been involved for 4 years, if there will ever be a good meeting based on people's differences of opinion, and that's welcome. That's why you have community council meetings. I think a good question to ask is whether, in this case, the meeting was met under code, which we believe it has been, and then whether it's fair to impose on this developer additional requirements that aren't in code. I certainly recommend looking at it if you aren't happy with the sufficiency as written. I do think that the question that you're going to be asked on Tuesday night to answer is whether this property is better suited under R10 than R8. And we provided the where those lines are drawn is not the question that's going to be asked. It's whether under code this property is better zoned R10. I'm happy to answer any of the criteria. I would mention under the Hillside District Plan, we are still in the low density. It's a 0 to 1 dwelling unit per acre. We still meet that. When you look at the surrounding densities of all the other parcels that have been developed, and we heard a lot of testimony that there's reasons why we don't want that much density in some areas of the hillside, and we're not asking for that. That's why at planning and zoning, previous rezone attempts for higher density have not passed. And how we ended up with the number 23 at this case was, and I believe Francis can speak to this, but staff didn't even recommend a limit. There was no special limitation put forth initially on the rezone application. But when it was clear to the applicant that maybe planning and zoning wanted some cap, it was suggested by my clients to put a cap of 25. And then that number, through deliberations with planning and zoning commissioners after a lot of testimony, finally reached 23. So that's the number that we are putting forth to this assembly. And again,
Yeah, very quickly, and then we'll get to the public.
Just 1 minute. And I wanted to speak to your concern about public comment, because a lot of times things don't get into record. I agree with you.
We know, but state your name and just speak up a little bit.
G-I-O-N-E-T. We met the 12-minute requirement for that, but what's not in your records is that there was a HALO meeting on May 3rd. The FCC put out notices more than 21 days, which also sort of meets that requirement. So 21 days, it's not a public mailer. HALO goes with FCC. That was a 45, it was a long meeting, and in their records, in their minutes that are approved, they put both R8 and R10 criteria, so everybody would know it. So, and then on the May 23rd, that notice was also sent out more than 21 days before the public, before the Planning and Zoning Commission, and was actually held 20 days before the Planning and Zoning Commission. That was also sent out as a email to all FCC people. So the first one in February was the required one by the city. The second two, we knew there wasn't enough. 12 minutes is short time. We met the requirement, but we saw the need, and two other meetings were held. Now, one was held by Mr. Brownson, and you've heard before, he's the vice president. At that meeting, he was asked by the public to recuse himself. It still went on for 45 minutes, questions were answered, and duly noted, and
Thank you,
has
sir.
been part of our
So, the public, and I guess beginning with public that are in the affected area. So, are there any of those here?
Thank you.
Hi, everybody. I'm Pat Dougherty, D-O-U-G-H-E-R-T-Y. And you've heard a lot from me on this issue. And I just want to say, I'm a citizen. I am not a land use attorney. There's been a lot of learning along the way here. So yes, if I had it to do over again, I would have made issues of many of the things that you're now looking back and saying, well, why didn't the community do this? And the simple answer is because I didn't know exactly the rules. But I will say that as a citizen, I went to the Title 21 and I just read what it says there. And I think a plain reading of that language suggests a certain kind of participation in this process that was simply not allowed here. I wrote a list, which I handed to all of you, which you all have, that just says, without plats, without, sort of all kinds of details about what you're going to do on the land, there's a certain kind of information that you ought to share with the community, with the understanding that these are just people who went to work, went home, had dinner, then they showed up at the community council meeting. They weren't briefed on what was going to happen, and they weren't really prepared to ask a lot of questions. They mostly wanted just some basic information about what's going to transpire here. And that did not happen. And Mr. GNA is right, there were other meetings, but there wasn't more information. We went through the same process again. Oh, let's have another meeting with the community. Oh, well, we can't actually answer those questions. We don't know that. I mean, Todd and I talked about this the other day. Todd acknowledged that the strategy of the developers was to keep information away from the community so they couldn't make trouble in the rezoning as it happened previously. Now, that wasn't a shock to me because it was so obvious. That was the process. So I want to
Can you wrap up, Mr. Doherty, and then we get to others?
Okay. I have no issues with the notice to the community. That was done fine. There's no question there. Well, I think that's...
Any other people in the affected area? Yeah, sir, come on. State your name loudly, and remember, we're recording it here, so trying to get that so people can hear that.
Okay, my name is Mark June. The last name is spelled June, and I had some factual observations of the discussion. One is that the rights of property owners include the right to have a proper planning process and the right to have a developer make their case. In terms of the community meeting, something that may not be apparent to all of you is that the community meeting was chaired by the developer. The minutes, I'm going to disagree respectfully with Assemblyperson Constant, reflect what happened, not an endorsement of what happened. There's no rule to say in the minutes, and I disagree. There's no opportunity.
Just for the record, I never said that you said that.
Let us finish.
I never said that.
There's no President Reagan moment where you can say, this is my microphone, don't shut it off, is my point. There were no answers at the meeting. The planning department said they met the criteria of the meeting. Obviously, we disagree. Whether a meeting that does not answer questions is a meeting is something for you to decide. I think this is important. I called the developer's designated representative both before and after, and I emailed, and there was no response. So you heard today that planning doesn't care what happened at the meeting. I respectfully disagree with that. The question is the rezone appropriate? They have the burden to change the status quo, and the planning department said that the analysis is, does it support the most intensive use permissible? The only information we had was 40 to 45 lots, which was previously rejected a number of times. And that's the only thing known. And from the public's perspective, that's when the negotiations begin between the developer and the planning department and the boards and the assembly. And during that entire process, we are left out.
Can you conclude, Mr. June?
Sure. The Halo meeting and the pool hall meeting, those were both after the fact meetings. And if density is truly an issue to be considered, we have to have some idea of where lots will be and how many lots will be there. And that's why I respectfully disagree with some of
Good. Any other affected property owners here? Any other non-affected public members want to say? Not your 3 minutes, though. Be very brief, Mr. Hebron.
My name is Eugene Haberman. I represent myself. Follow the public process on appropriate decision made by the governing bodies for interest of the message developed. First, I'd like to note a common view among many here of the Assembly, a concern about how the community councils are run, and they vary. And it appears that also at this point, and I see as Southern November, is controlled by the leadership of the community council, particularly on the valley, where they prevent really the engagement of conversation. Now, I saw this minutes, and I'll be real brief. I saw that municipal light and power town hall meeting, well, referenced to by the administration. I remind you, municipal light and town hall meeting was at Lusac Library, where the public was told you can only question and not comment. You know that this meeting that we're talking about minutes, questions and answers, fair chance for the public to comment. Now, what would have been more appropriate is to hold a special meeting on a single subject, on this subject, hosted by the community councils, focused on that, and not have all the other angles.
Thank you, Mr. Haberman.
I have a very specific
Mr.
question.
Dunbar.
So, Mr. June stated that he called and emailed the number that provided, did not get a response. My question for the developers is, can you answer that? Why did that happen? And the question for planning is that relevant. If they do it, if one of the requirements is you give your information at that meeting, then the information is wrong or unresponsive, that's affecting your decision. So it's already.
So in response to that, and this is Becky Lipson speaking for the record, I believe the individual Mr. June is talking about is Tom Dreyer, who is not present with us today. Mr. June has been in communications with both my office regarding, at the same time that this R8 to R10 rezone is going through, there was also an appeal. There have just been several concurrent matters. I'm not sure exactly which one he's speaking to, but I believe legal questions were posed by Mr. June to the developer, and it was.
Okay.
I don't
Thank-
have additional
thank you.
information on that, but it was an intentional.
All right.
Not responding.
Did you want to say something, Mr. McLaughlin?
I don't think I have anything to say.
Okay. Any other assembly members? I was rushing to try and get all that in. Did you want to say something? No. Then, well, yes, you did. Then, yeah.
Well, no, I mean, I think that, there were two questions that were raised at the assembly that I think that the assembly members need to know. One is that under the existing R8 zoning, they're allowed to have 18 lots, okay? You can get 18 residential lots under the existing zoning, which is R8. You can get 5 more lots if the property is rezoned. That's 5 lots spread over 77 acres. So that changes the residential density from 0.23 dwelling units per acre to 0.29 dwelling units per acre. Put another way, that goes from 1 lot every 4.5 acres currently to 1 lot every 3.5 acres should the rezone be adopted. And then a question was raised about the whether or not the rezone is in conformance with the comprehensive.
Well, what he
plan.
asked was, does it make any difference if they have that meeting and they say, but you can call or write me, and then they don't answer? Does that make any difference to you?
I'm not a party to those.
No.
I don't know what to say.
Can say yes or no.
Well, no, so
I
I'm
mean,
not.
or-
it's not
or
the
another
factual
answer
question.
that-
The question is, in general, does planning care whether or not they're giving? I mean, what if they gave them a number and email was totally bogus? That impact your decision?
That doesn't matter.
So it's. I guess I would answer it this way. Yes, it matters, and yes, I care. I think that we all do. But is this sort of thing going on, and all the lawsuits that are the appeals that have been submitted? Is it required by code? That's.
Would it be
the
relevant
question.
to your consideration of the rezone and your recommendation?
We're looking at what's in the written documentation rather than
So
accusations.
no, it would not be relevant to your determination of whether to recommend the rezone or not.
Mr. Chair, you have my 180-page packet in front of you.
Yeah. Yes, sir.
We got to.
Yeah, we've got to move on to the next.
Just very specific to this one question. And my name is Todd Brownson, and what the point that Mark has brought up is there was one appeal going on at the same time to the RA conservation plat, and then there was a threat of a second appeal from Mr. June himself. So some questions went directly to my attorney as to whether or not we could meet, and a lot of these were questions that Mark wanted to bring up. Are these under the rules of negotiation? All these things I don't even necessarily understand the legal terms of being an attorney. But once it was determined that things would be off the record, then Mark June actually accompanied myself, and we walked the property, and I addressed his concerns. And it's disingenuous for everyone to say that they don't know what's going on, because this has been a 5-year process. It's the same people. We've had countless meetings on this topic.
But not the same rezone. I mean, it's
And
been a
for
moving.
this rezone, we had the February meeting. We followed it up with a May meeting. We followed up with a Halo meeting. We had a planning and zoning meeting, all of which take public testimony. We followed up with an additional Halo meeting, and then we followed it up with a coffee shop meeting. And so I just don't know how to say there has been more than enough information provided to everyone involved.
Thank you, sir. This meeting, work session really is adjourned.